The record of Nazi crimes was no secret to the rest of the world. There was a United Nations War Crimes Commission, which had nothing to do with the United Nations today, of refugee lawyers who were already assembling evidence of crimes in a headquarters in London. Actions like the Kristallnacht, where all the Jewish synagogues were burned down, many of the people involved or in it were murdered, were known throughout the world, certainly in Germany and certainly throughout the rest of the world as well. So because Germany attacked so many different countries, the Allied leaders, specifically the United States, Soviet Union, and Great Britain, and France had been defeated, they had a lesser role, all agreed that justice had to be done, lest vengeance be let loose if we ever win the war. So it was an attempt by the world community to do what had not been successfully done after the First World War, and that is put on trial the main perpetrators of these acts, which were obviously massive criminal acts, and give them a chance to defend themselves. And that's how the Nuremberg Trials were set up, and they were set up to collect the evidence to support those allegations by using primarily the German documentation themselves as clear evidence of the crimes, as well as all kinds of additional evidence from survivors, etc. So it was a very comprehensive, not an impromptu thing. It was something which had been warned, the Germans had been warned years in advance that they would be held to account. And the Nuremberg trials were the beginning of that. The Nazi crimes were so widespread that it was difficult to decide where to begin first. And the victorious Allied powers focused in the International Military Tribunal trial, which consisted of France, United Kingdom, the United States, and the Soviet Union. All the well-known names. If Hitler had been alive, of course, he would have been the first defendant. But they had Goering. They couldn't find Martin Bormann. They did find some of the other very prominent Nazi leaders who were selected to be put in that trial. Then there was a very ridiculous limitation. There were only room for 22 seats in the dock at Nuremberg. So the trials were symbolic. You can't try just 22. What about 25? What about 2005? What about 25,000? So it was a symbolic trial, the International Military Tribunal, and by the most prominent known people. When the International Military Trial was over, based upon official German documentation, almost invariably, as well as some witness testimony, but basically it was the Nazi reports themselves, there was a feeling among the Allies and the public that this was just a snapshot, just an overview. And in order to really understand how it would be possible for a civilized country like Germany to tolerate and perpetrate and participate and cover up these horrible atrocities against humanity. And in order to do that, it was felt necessary by the United States primarily to put on trial all those without which it couldn't have happened. For example, we had a trial against the doctors who performed medical experiments on concentration camp victims, some of which were quite horrible. They would see how long it took for a flyer to drown in the ice sea. So he took concentration camp inmates and soaked them in ice water until he was dead. For example, they took women who were inmates of concentration camps like Ravensbrück and cut open their legs and threw dirt into the legs to see how long it would take them to heal and what you would do. So the doctors were involved in this type of experimentation, largely on concentration camp victims or other perceived enemies of the German Reich. So they were put on trial. Then you had the industrialists. It's not generally known. Auschwitz was built with money from I.G. Farben in order to get a source of unlimited labor supply, where the rule was, if they can no longer work, kill them. Vernichtung durch Arbeit was the slogan. I wrote a book about that called Less Than Slaves. It was published in German under the title Lohn des Grauens. And it tells the story of how the German industrialists work people to death as part of a program, feed them the minimum possible, get the maximum production. And it was the leading German companies, IG Farben and Krupp, Siemens, IAG, and 3,000 other companies, and I had a list of them. And they, of course, denied that anything happened. They said, no, things were rough in Germany all over, and you can't expect us to treat these prisoners better than we would treat our own workers. I asked Speer, Minister for Armaments and Production, what he thought about those excuses in the light of the fact that I had captured his documentation and his orders and said they were all lies. And his answer to me, after he had served 20 years in Spandau prison, I met him secretly and privately, just the two of us. I said, how do you explain that? He said, they're lying. Of course, I knew they were lying. I said, I'm writing this book for Harvard University. They will be very meticulous. Everything must be absolutely correct, and I want it to be absolutely correct. I want to give you the manuscript, if you would accept it, and go over these portions of it. And I gave him the manuscript, and he wrote on every page which related to this, einverstanden, einverstanden, agreed, agreed, agreed. So the industrialists, IG Farben and Krupp, were put on trial. Then we had the justice ministries. The motion picture justice at Nuremberg was focused on the justice ministries. The judges who perverted the law, who would sentence people for racial crimes, for no crimes, for persecution. Some of those were put on trial as well. And then we had also a trial for the ministers who were lying to all the rest of the world about their intention, their plans. So there was a row of 12 such subsequent trials. And this was designed to bring out the full picture, and it was based primarily on documentary proof as well as some confessions. To what extent was it successful? Limited extent. The German public at that time was more concerned with finding some bread to eat, and they paid very little attention. The press, after the international military trial against Goering was over, they all went home, and the subsequent trials, very little was known. However, as part of the Germans' history, they play a very important role, even for Germans today. And I might add at this point that the German government offered me their Verdienstkreuz Erste Klasse, their highest civilian award. This was several years after the war and after the Wiedergutmachung, the restitution program, was well underway. And they asked me if I would accept it. And I hesitated. But I thought about it, and I met with some of the survivor groups, and I told them I'm going to accept it, because this is the only way the next generation has of not feeling guilty and saying, I'm sorry. And I never met a German, those who were involved in the murders, who said, I'm sorry. And I said, you cannot hold the new generation responsible for the crimes of their fathers or their grandfathers, and I'm going to accept it, and I did. And I have not regretted it, because I'm looking for, and I always looked for, some sign of remorse from the German public. And while I was in Germany prosecuting Nazi criminals, it was always lacking. When I was hired in the Pentagon by General Telford Taylor, who was going to be in charge of these subsequent proceedings, he knew that I had experience during the war as a war crimes investigator, when I had entered the concentration camps as they were being liberated to collect evidence of the crimes, which meant going to the Schreibstube, the office of the camp, collecting all the documents there, securing them, taking them out, describing from witnesses, people in the camp, what took place in the camp. We captured whoever we could capture. Sometimes the commandant escaped. Sometimes he was killed. But I would collect all of that evidence. And that was the basis for subsequent trials conducted by the Army, the United States Army, in what had been the German concentration camp at Dachau. And these were military trials, very short. They would bring in the officers, the Nazi officers, from camps that I was in, Flossenburg, Buchenwald, Ebensee, and so on, and put them on trial, 30 or 40 at a time. And the trials lasted a few minutes per defendant. The 3 officers, if they had any legal training, it was not obvious. They'd send up, "Herr Schmidt, you're a guard in the camp, Mauthausen or whatever, where terrible crimes were committed, people were starved, shot and tortured and all that. What do you have to say?" "Not guilty. Superior orders. What else could I do?" Well, the fact was, every German had in his old book, his book that he carried with him like a passport, required him to obey only legal orders. In order to start shooting a lot of little children, which is what my Einsatzgruppen guys did, by the thousands. Nobody's going to say that was lawful under any kind of a law. Anyway, I was collecting these evidences of the crimes in the camp, which were the basis for these military trials. I was eager to go home when the war was over. I got home as fast as I could go. I joined the Army in order to do my bit, and when the Army was over, I said, "We won, I'm going home, goodbye." And I had been discharged honorably as a sergeant of infantry, awarded 5 battle stars for having survived the beaches of Normandy, having survived crossing the Rhine pontoon bridge, having been there for the final battle of the Bulge in the Ardennes Forest. I was out of the Army, but the Pentagon sent me a cable and asked me to come to Washington. They offered to make me a colonel, and so I would have been promoted from sergeant to colonel. I said, "Go back to Germany?" I said, "In the Army? Forget it. I was not interested in doing that." The Army and I didn't get along well. I'm talking about the American Army. We had a different approach to many problems. However, they finally persuaded me that I could go as a civilian and could quit any time I wanted to. Whereupon I promptly married my childhood sweetheart, who had been waiting for me patiently for about 10 years while I went to law school, while I went through the Army. And incidentally, she is also my age, 98 years old. I was invited to go back to Germany to help Telford Taylor with these subsequent trials of the broader category. And I had a staff of about 50 translators and investigators. We went to Berlin, and there we went through all the German archives, whatever was left in the ruins of Berlin. We would have this team of former German refugees mostly going over the documentation to find things which would be supported by the various trials. If they found something, it was immediately mimeographed and relayed from Berlin to Nuremberg and served as evidence for the trials. One of my researchers, a young man from Switzerland, came to me one day and he said, "Look what I found." And he gave me Leitsordners, loosely bound books. They were Ereignismeldungen aus der UdSSR, action reports from the Eastern Front, top secret, geheime Reichssache. And there they had daily reports from special units called Einsatzgruppen, A, B, C, and D, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, etc., broken down in segments, reporting how many Jews had been killed by that particular unit on that particular day in what particular location, as well as how many gypsies had been killed, as well as some miscellaneous others. I sat down with this, I had 2 or 3 of them, big reports, and began to tabulate how many Jews had been murdered, how many people had been murdered by these special extermination squads. When I reached a million killed, murdered, I stopped and I took a sample. I took the next plane, flew down from Berlin to Nuremberg, went to General Taylor. I said, "General, we have to put on a new trial." And I said, "Look at this, cold-blooded mass murder." He said, "We can't put on a new trial now. All the lawyers are already assigned. The Pentagon has agreed to this. There isn't any enthusiasm to have additional trials. So we can't put on a new trial." I said, "You can't let them go. This is mass murder, mass murder. The best evidence you could get. Top secret contemporaneous reports from the front, sent to headquarters, consolidated in headquarters and issued in 99 copies, and I have the distribution list. You can't ignore this." He said, "Can you do it in addition to your other work?" And I said, "Sure." So he said, "Okay, you're it." So I became the chief prosecutor in what was certainly the biggest murder trial in human history. I didn't call a single witness because I didn't need them. Witness testimony is fallible. Witnesses contradict each other. I relied only on an expert to come in and certify that these were authentic documents and not something that I had invented. And the guy who was assembling them in Berlin, I brought him down to Nuremberg and where did these documents come from? So we laid a foundation for the validity of the documents, and I arrested the prosecution's case in 2 days. World history. I was 27 years old. That was my first case. And not only is it noted for its speed, but I asked myself, what do you ask for? What is the penalty for murdering over 1 million people, including babies, children, and smashing their heads against a tree, requiring the mother to hold the infant to her breast so you could shoot the infant and kill both of them with one shot, and so on. Where do you begin and where do you end with a trial like this? And I decided, it was my personal decision approved by General Taylor, who was also a very fine Harvard lawyer. We became law partners after the war, no longer living. My selection was based on 2 factors. First of all, you had to be in custody, captured. If you have a name and you don't have the prisoner, you have nothing, we have time to go looking for him. If he was in custody and you had absolutely convincing proof, I chose them on the basis of their rank. I think I had 6 or 8 generals in the SS, in the dock, and also by their education. If they had a doctorate degree or sometimes double doctorate degree, and one of them had a double doctorate degree, he killed 33,771 Jews in Babi Yar in 2 days, 29-30 September 1939. Selected them on that basis, and then the ridiculous basis, we only had 22 seats. So if you come with mass murder and you need another seat, we're not putting in a loose chair, you know. So quite ridiculous in some ways. On the other hand, enormously interesting and powerful. Their defense was usually a pack of lies. I wasn't there. I was at my grandmother's funeral. I checked it out. He never had a grandmother, etc. And they were all convicted. 13 of them were sentenced to death. The trial itself lasted about half a year while they went through all their alibis. These educated, high-ranking German officers were mass murderers. There was no doubt whatsoever of that fact. By mass murderers, I mean they each was responsible for killing thousands of people, thousands of children. And I came to the conclusion that war can make murderers out of otherwise decent people. Because the lead defendant, Dr. Otto Ohlendorf, father of 5 children, was reasonably honest in the trial. And he said, look, we're acting in self-defense. He said, self-defense? Germany attacks France, Belgium, Holland, Norway, Stockholm, Russia, Poland. Nobody was attacking Germany. Where's the self-defense? Well, we knew, Hitler knew secret information, that the Russians planned to attack us. Therefore, we had to attack them first. The judges considered that. And they concluded that if everybody were allowed to do that, when they suspect their neighbor of committing a crime, they can go out and kill him and his wife and his children and his neighbors next door and his grandma and his grandfather. What would the world look like? So they said that defense is absurd. It's dangerous and ridiculous. And of course then sentenced them to death. That was under the leadership of Judge Michael Mismano, who was from the Superior Court of Pennsylvania, and 2 other American judges. Nevertheless, that type of argumentation still exists in the world today. Preemptive self-defense, as it's called in law, has not been ruled out, unfortunately, just as aggression, which was condemned at Nuremberg Trials as a supreme international crime, has been forgotten by those who try to teach the rest of the world that it was a great crime. And so I have been working very, very hard to have it recognized that these are crimes against humanity for which there is no valid legal excuse or moral excuse. And it's time for the world community to begin to respect those Nuremberg documents and conclusions and statements of law on which the peace of all mankind depends. So that's give you some feeling of what it was like to participate in that, and of the sadness which follows from the world as I see it today, in which no state really is prepared to, well, I would say no state engaged in war is prepared to accept the Nuremberg principles, much to my regret and to the regret of all the victims up to now and those which will follow until they do. The Nazi crimes were so enormous that there was no way that the civilized community could tolerate them. But the law was evolving slowly. We had tried after the First World War to put the Kaiser on trial for having attacked little Belgium and so on. And those trials turned out to be rather a farce. The Germans refused to cooperate, and when they conducted their own trials in their own Supreme Court in Leipzig, they had only a couple of convictions and they promptly escaped or were released. So that was the background. However, there was recognition that you couldn't just turn your back and say the war's over and goodbye. They had committed, crimes which I personally witnessed, such horror that you can wonder if they are human, would engage in such criminal and vicious activities. So we were developing the law, and the law has to change to meet the needs of society. It's designed to protect. That's what law is about. The law is not static, and the law must be changed when the circumstances are such that failure to enforce the law would be unacceptable to any normal human being. Of course, everybody was a member of the Nazi Party. You couldn't be a member of the German bar without being a member of the Nazi Party. The Jewish lawyers were working as investigators on my trial teams. First, they came to the United States and were selling shoes or doing whatever they could do, and were happy to come back to Germany and be involved in some legal activities. So I wrote an article in one of the leading law journals, Nuremberg Trial Procedure and the Rights of the Accused. And I noted that the German suspects were given the kind of a trial which they, in the days of their pomp and power, never gave to anyone. They were absolutely fair trials, open to the public for everyone to see. And the result of the trial was a step forward in the evolution of international criminal law. The principles of the Nuremberg Trials were adopted by the United Nations General Assembly. We now have laws protecting crimes against humanity. We do have not only an international criminal court in The Hague, which is functioning. We have lots of international criminal courts functioning in other jurisdictions. In Rwanda, we had the Gacaca trials, we had other trials in many Latin American countries which are not getting enough publicity. And I'm not suggesting by any means that these trials are conducted perfectly. They're not. They are too expensive. It's very hard to conduct a trial against a leader of a state where they won't let investigators in. If they try to sneak in, they kill them. Or they give themselves immunity, and you have legal argumentation about interpreting or misinterpreting every clause in the Rome Statute, which binds the court. But these are growing pains. It's a prototype, just as your first computer would occupy a big room. Now you carry a little thing in your pocket which does all of that. And so it will be with the evolution of criminal law, international criminal law. And I'm much encouraged by what I see. I see the growth of humanitarian institutions. I see what I call the awakening of the human conscience. Now, it does not go up in a straight line. It goes up and comes down, and then it cycles around again and goes a little bit higher. Then it comes down again and goes a little bit higher. But the trend, there's no doubt in my mind, the trend is upward. And considering that we are trying to change things which have been glorified for centuries. We have glorified killing, the army, hooray, it's the road to power and riches and prestige and land. So if you are not prepared to change the law, to help protect society. What is your future? I say that to you now as an old man who has spent all of his life, practically all of my life, trying to create a more humane and peaceful world. I cannot do it alone. There are many, many changes. I think Germany has been doing a very good job in moving in a direction which recognized the evils of the Nazi regime and tried to make amends. I think the Bundesentschädigungsgesetz, the restitution law, was also a unique model. Not perfect by any means, but it was there for the first time. And I'm proud of having been a close participant in the creation of that program, because it showed that the new generation was trying to make amends. There are some wounds for which no money is adequate, but the effort to try to help them and try to prevent the repetition of the crime by teaching it to young law students and those who are interested in ethics. This is a great step forward, and I commend the German teachers and professors and students who have recognized this and will continue to build on the Nuremberg precedents in the interest of all of humankind. I wish you all the best of luck.